My name is Lauren. I am a mother, a wife, a woman who once thought she knew what love looked like. I used to describe myself as someone who cared deeply. I worked with people, I tried to help, and I told myself that those things made me a loving person. But on January 15th, 2024, everything I held as proof of my lovingness changed. I want you to understand from the start. When I tell this story, I am telling it as the person who lived it. I am standing in my truth, and it hurts, and it heals in the same breath. That evening, I was pregnant. I remember the small, ordinary things first. The bathroom tiles cool under my feet. The fluorescent light buzzing, my husband waiting just outside the door. I had some cramps. I started spotting. We went to the emergency room because it felt wrong in the kind of way women know instinctively is wrong. We waited for hours. I can still feel the time stretching like taffy, minutes dragged, the clock painted itself across the waiting room and never moved. Finally, hours later when they saw me, it was already too late to save the pregnancy. I had a miscarriage. After that, I started hemorrhaging. I was dismissed. They took my vitals, pressed on my abdomen, told me to put my feet up if it happened again, and sent me home. But in the bathroom, the hospital's bathroom, everything surrendered me. My hands went numb. I couldn't feel the floor. The strange thing wasn't panic first. It was a soft unhooking, like a chair being tipped and me sliding out of it. I found my husband and then collapsed into his arms. He put me on a chair. He called for help. While all that was happening, while doctors and nurses moved and spoke in a language that felt far away, I was in another place. I will try to describe that place the best I can. It felt like being at the bottom of an ocean at night. It was dark but not scary. There was a clarity to the darkness. It was full of presence rather than absence. Above me was a kind of moonlight that came through in waves, like light through water. I wanted that light. I reached for it. I pushed through a barrier that looked like soft waves. On the other side of that barrier, I could see the hospital, my husband, the corridor, a male nurse talking to two female nurses. I knew it was the hospital without seeing it properly. I tried and tried to break through, but it drained me. I pushed until my energy was gone, and I had to sink back. When I sank back into that darkness, there was no blankness. Instead, I was met by something unusual. My life, it came in snapshots, quick and bright like slides. From my birth, a scraped knee, a schoolyard laughter, a quiet day at my grandparents'. The small, ordinary things that stitch a life together, they flashed in front of me, one after another. Each frame felt like a small light. They came quickly, like someone flipping through a photo album at speed. Usually I thought life reviews were these perfect, solemn judgments. I expected a tally, a weight of right and wrong, but there was something else at work there. All at once, the frames collided and disappeared. I felt a brief confusion. This isn't how it's supposed to go. Then I realized that the thing I had expected wasn't the real lesson. Instead of being measured by acts, I was met by the truth of motive. It wasn't a stranger judging me. It was my own consciousness, the part inside me that knew why I did what I did, watching and showing. There was no need for an external judge because the part of me that knew the why was already the judge. I remember feeling stunned by how literal that was. You cannot hide your true motive from yourself when you are outside the body. The mirror of truth is merciless and merciful at once. I remember thinking about my years as a vegan and a vegetarian. I had been proud of those years. I had told people about them as a kind of badge. That memory came up bright and clean in front of me. In the beginning I had been moved by compassion, but by the end it was routine. I had become a club member, full of rituals and judgments, and my heart had sometimes stepped aside. The review showed me that it wasn't just what I did that mattered, it was why I did it. If my motive had been vanity, or identity, or performance, then the act was hollow. If the act came from heart-level love, it sang differently. That realization hit me like cold water. I had been doing many things that looked compassionate, but my heart wasn't always present. I felt the shame of that, and the shock of clarity at the same time. Before I even had a chance to be sorry, my inner witness answered me. You can't lie to yourself here. There was no deception possible. The part of me that had kidney-deep knowledge of why I did things was not going to let me rewrite my history. It was like standing in a mirror that reflected not only my face but the inside of my chest. I could not hide from myself. In that moment, the life I had lived felt both small and enormous. It suddenly mattered that I had been present in small moments, because that is where love grows or dies. I won't tell you that I understood everything that night. I didn't, but I remember begging. Not for money, not for fame, not for a second chance for accomplishment, but for the chance to love correctly. When you stand in front of what you truly are and realize what you came here to do, you don't ask for time to gather wealth or accolades. You ask for the one thing your heart finally recognizes as the only meaningful currency, love. That is what I asked to come back for. When I opened my eyes again, they were raw with that other place. I was on a stretcher. People hovered. They checked my blood pressure. They moved me. They said routine things, and then sent me home with instructions that felt like paperwork after a revelation. You can imagine how strange that feels. You've seen the universe, and then someone tells you to put your feet up if it happens again. The contrast was so thick, it made my skin feel thin. I spent the next 2 weeks trying to translate a new language into the old one I'd had. The other side doesn't use our clumsy words. There, everything is felt, vivid, perfectly honest. Here, words are flimsy and double-edged. Saying wicked might mean good or bad. We use love as a loose label for many feelings, and they muddy what we actually mean. I wanted to tell people the pure thing I had seen, that love is not an emotion you throw around as slang. It is the essence of life, the force in plants, in animals, in humans. But how do you say that without sounding mystical or naive? It took time to make words that might hold up. I began by remembering what it felt like in that room of light. People were there, but not in flesh. They were like glowing signatures, luminous forms of themselves. Up close, they all looked the same, but when you tuned into their light, you could tell who was who, because each had a vibration, a color softness unique to them. My husband was a bright presence. My children were brighter still, clustered together like warm lamps. The people who clustered at the front near me were not better than those further back. They had simply been filled with more of my attention in life. That is what changed me. The other side taught me that attention is the currency of love. I saw people I had thought were insignificant, a cashier, a neighbor, and realized how many of those brief, inattentive moments added up. Every time I half-listened at a checkout counter, every time I let my mind be elsewhere while someone spoke, I left a tiny dulling in that person's light. The accumulation of those dullings made some people dimmer when I looked at them. It is not that their essence was less. It was that I had not poured enough of myself into them when I had the chance. The realization was awful and freeing. Awful because I could see my missed opportunities as plain as day. Freeing because I could also see the remedy. Love can be grown by the steady habit of presence. It does not need theatrical displays. It needs undivided attention. Listening, truly listening, is the simplest form of making love. When you stop planning your response and instead put down your phone, turn your body, meet a person with your eyes and your breath, you give them the most generous thing you have, your being. People often ask if the other side is a place of judgment. What I saw was not punishment. It was truth made visible. My inner witness, the part that knows why, was not there to condemn, but to show me the real measure of my life. I will never forget the way it said indirectly but utterly clearly, "Look at what you were thinking when you did this." That was the key. Motive matters. The place didn't care what I wore or how many hours I volunteered. It cared whether I had been present when I did those things or whether I had used them as a badge. And then there was the lesson about life itself. On that side, you can see that life is not a ladder where some beats others. It is the same life moving through everything. The plant on the windowsill, the dog that licked my face, my sleeping child, they all carry the same essence. I had been taught hierarchies. Some lives are more important than others. But in that place I felt a collapse of that scale. Life is life. If you take life, You are taking life, whether it is a leaf or a chicken or a human. The ethical complexity of that reality does not make us into monsters. It makes us into humble participants. We consume to live, and living is a cycle of giving and taking, but the other side asks that we do so consciously, with gratitude and awareness. The more I translated, the more I realized how small daily choices add up. A kind word when you're busy. One extra minute of attention at bedtime. A patient silence when someone is searching for the right phrase. These are the ways you fill someone's cup. The other side made it clear. Brightness is not an innate lottery. Brightness is the imprint of attention. When those cups are full, people feel you even after you are gone. When they are empty, your presence fades quicker than a photograph. That image frightened me. I saw myself pulled back from my people and shown a timeline, a metaphorical 8 years later, where my presence had thinned into a memory. It wasn't a punishment, it was a consequence. I understood that if I wanted to remain felt in my children's lives, I needed to seed their cups with consistent presence now. I had come back to fix this, to do the smaller work I had avoided in the name of identity and righteousness. I had not come back to be a better version of a judgmental vegan or a busier healer. I had come back to be present, to love with attention. The translation into words has been clumsy. I still stumble. Some people hear me and gasp, some roll their eyes, some find the whole thing consoling. That is okay. My job now is not to make everyone understand immediately. My job now is to live differently, and to show how small intentional changes can widen a life's light. I practice being present. I kneel at dinner. I put my phone in another room when my child needs me. I look cashiers in the eye. I say thank you like I mean it. It sounds simple, and it is. The other side made it simple. It made me see that love is not complex. It is patient attention given again and again. After the experience, I began cataloging small moments like a new kind of missionary. I wanted to test the lesson. Is attention really that powerful? So I started deliberately paying attention to the small, forgettable interactions of daily life. The first test was with a cashier at the grocery store, someone I'd often avoid eye contact with, the transaction too quick to warrant real presence. That day I stayed. I listened to the small talk. I made eye contact. I smiled. I felt absurdly vulnerable. It wasn't heroic, but it was honest. Later, in the mirror room of the other place, that cashier stood a little closer to me. Her light had not changed in essence, but it had more fullness in the places I had given. That small proof continued to astonish me. I realized that presence is not measured by the length of time you give someone, but by the quality. A single minute of undistracted attention is more nourishing than an hour of distracted company. In those weeks I also tried giving my husband a new kind of attention. I stopped rehearsing answers during conversations. I put my hand on his in the car, not because I needed anything, but because I wanted him to feel that he mattered. The hardest part was breaking the reflex to perform. I had been praised before. You are so loving, people say, as if that's a badge that proves a life well lived. I had enjoyed that praise. It had become an unconscious currency. The other world stripped that away. It showed me that praise and compliments can be deceiving mirrors. You can be praised for looks of kindness that are thin. The real work was not to be admired, but to be present. That required humility. It required renouncing the spectacle of being good and embracing the repeatable, often boring act of attention. Sometimes my efforts produced immediate change. My daughter, who used to talk and sometimes be brushed off by my busy mind, started bringing me her drawings more often because I had begun to show up differently. She felt lighter. She would climb into my lap and tell stories with more detail, trusting that I would listen without checking my phone. Those small moments were not dramatic. They were tiny filaments of light weaving deeper threads between us. The daily practice changed the texture of our morning routine. It made our house quieter in the right ways, softer, more present. Work became simpler too. In my healing sessions, I had often felt pressure to perform, to prove that I could tune into people. After the near-death experience, I stopped trying to show. I simply listened. I let space open up between myself and the person across from me. I let my questions be fewer and kinder. People responded by being more honest. In that honesty, healing happened not because of dramatic pronouncements, but because someone was there to hold their story, fully, without distraction. The power wasn't in a talent I owned, it was in the attention I offered. I also learned to be softer with myself. The mirror had shown me my faults, and I had begged to come back so I could do them right. That didn't mean I was suddenly perfect. It meant that I could practice with patience. Some days I would fail. I would check my phone during dinner, or I would answer a child with impatience. Those days hurt more, because the mirror's memory remembered them, but the pain became a teacher rather than a sentence. I'd say sorry. I'd try again. The habit of presence is built from many small attempts, not an overnight transformation. An unexpected side effect was a clearer sense of priorities. When you realize that a few undivided moments can change a relationship's color, the trivial distractions fall away. You find yourself keeping your calendar simpler. You stop volunteering for things that pull you thin for the sake of appearing generous. The other side didn't say we must abstain from work or community. It said attend with your heart. If you can't give your full attention, then don't pretend you can. That clarity changed how I paced my days and who I was willing to be with. I also began to notice how much people crave to be seen. In the waiting room of life, there are so many hungry eyes. When you look at someone with real attention, you close a small, aching gap. The person may not explode into gratitude. They may simply feel lighter the next day. That is enough. The ripple does not always make a huge splash, but ripples add up. A neighborhood grown thick with small attentions becomes a kinder place. A family with repeated minutes of full presence grows into deeper trust. One of the things I did not expect to happen after my experience was how much forgiveness would show up as a natural consequence of seeing truth. When you stand in front of the mirror of your motives, grudges and resentments begin to look small and worn. They look like cobwebs in a bright room. That doesn't mean they disappear easily. It means they are easier to dismantle because you can see them for what they are. I remember a client whose mother had died many years earlier. Their relationship had been painful, abusive, complicated. What you might call a wound with long roots. The client came to me not because they expected miracles, but because they wanted a different kind of ending to the story they'd been living with. During our session, a message came through clearly. Not from me, but through me, that their mother had waited. The message was not melodramatic. It was a simple thing. I gave you my name. It is all I had. Hearing that, the client wept and forgave. The forgiveness was not theatrical. It was a clean release. I saw that love can linger on that other side, waiting for an opening to be heard. And sometimes, all it needs is a small, true translation. That session changed how I thought about apology and repair. I used to think apologies mattered mostly for the person who did wrong, that saying sorry was a relief for the offender. Now I saw that apology is a bridge for the wounded. It is an act of giving and a sort of clearing out that lets the other person breathe more easily. Apologies, when done with presence and without defensiveness, can be powerful repairers of the web, and forgiveness is often the other side of that repair. It is not always possible to get the repair you want in the lifetime of the person who hurt you. People die. They change. They sometimes return in different forms. But I saw that the force that holds us, the love that is life, allows for translation across realms. I cannot promise that everyone will get a message from someone who has transitioned, but the other side seemed to show that love waits. If you are open to receiving it, it may come. If you are willing to forgive, you make room for healing to complete itself. That knowledge softened how I approached my own relationships. I became more willing to say sorry first. I stopped defending old patterns with cleverness. Saying, "I'm sorry," became a practice, not a performance. When I apologized to my husband for small cruelties, things shifted. When I asked my child to forgive me for a curt word, the distance closed. Those small acts of repair are not dramatic. They are the steady plumbing of life, keeping the pipes clear so love can flow. Sometimes forgiveness arrived where I least expected. Once I ran into an ex-colleague who had spoken sharply to me in a meeting years before. I had held that memory like a hot coal. When we crossed paths, I felt the impulse to rehearse my old defense. Instead, I remembered the mirror and the way it revealed how thin such resentments are. So I said simply, "I'm sorry for how I reacted then." The person looked stunned. We both laughed awkwardly, and a small freedom followed. Removing that coal made me lighter. I walked away feeling that I had cleared a pebble from my shoe. So forgiveness became not a grand doctrine, but a daily, practical tool. It is a way of pruning the vines that suffocate love. It is also an act of humility. To apologize is to admit you are not perfect. To forgive is to admit you are whole enough to let go. The mirror taught me that our motives matter, even in apologies. A half-hearted sorry is transparent. A true apology requires attention, an admission, and a small rebuilding act that shows you mean it. Coming back to my body was a strange, sometimes painful process. The other side was pure and light. This life is heavy and cluttered. For 2 weeks after I returned, my spirit was restless. Part of me wanted to stay where truth was clear and the air was clean. My body felt like an ill-fitting suit. It took time to reorient. I had to learn how to carry revelation without being crushed by the mud of everyday life. The first practical thing I did was to simplify. I stopped collecting commitments that didn't align with the new contract in my heart. If I could not offer my full attention to something, I didn't sign up for it. If an activity drained my presence, I declined. That doesn't mean I became selfish. It means I prioritized the small acts that fill cups, family dinners, a patient listening at night, a hand held in silence. I learned to say no politely and firmly, so I could say yes fully when it mattered. I also changed how I practiced my healing work. Before the experience, I often felt pressure to be right, to prove my abilities. Now I show up with less need to impress. I begin sessions with silence, an offering of my attention. I ask fewer questions and listen more. The messages come through cleaner because there is less ego interference. People leave sessions feeling lighter not because I said something spectacular, but because they were finally seen. There are times I still feel guilty about all the years I spent performing acts of goodness without presence. But guilt can be useful if it motivates change. I try not to let it paralyze me. Instead, I let it be a compass. The mirror showed me my lack, the places where my heart had stepped aside, and that knowledge is the map for repair. Each day I practice the small acts of presence, as if they are stitches, slowly mending something that I once thought was already whole. There are practical rituals I adopted to keep myself steady. Every morning before the rush begins, I sit quietly and remember the web. I visualize the faces who matter, imagine their cups full or half full, and set an intention to give attention to at least one person in a focused way that day. I turn off notifications during dinner. I put my phone in another room while I do bedtime. These might sound like small things, but they change the shape of days. They make it possible to stay present even when life is loud. I also became more honest with people about my limits. Instead of saying, "I'll be there with fingers crossed," I learned to say, "I'd love to, but I can't give it the attention it deserves right now." Honesty saves energy and preserves the quality of the moments you do commit to. People respect that. They would rather have your full self for a shorter time than your half-hearted presence for longer stretches. The return is not a finish line. It's a recommitment. I have to remind myself continually that the work is not heroic but steady. I still get distracted. I still lose patience. The mirror will always be there, a memory of what I saw. But the difference now is that I feel responsible in a tender way. I have a job to do, not to achieve perfection, but to be present, minute by minute. My life now is a practice in returning, to my family, to strangers, to myself. My life after the experience turned partly toward teaching, not in a grand academic sense, but as a practical sharing of how to live differently. People ask me how to cultivate presence, and my answer is always the same: small daily practices, repeated. Love is not found in slogans. It is found in the repetition of kind attention. I started small workshops with parents, not because I wanted to preach, but because I wanted to offer tools I had learned. We practiced simple exercises. One person speaks for 2 uninterrupted minutes, while the other listens without planning a response. Families agree to 1 screen-free meal a day. Spouses practice naming 3 things they noticed about the other that day. These practices are ridiculously simple, and that is their magic. They teach the body how to be still and the mind how to resist the reflex to perform. Parents who tried these exercises told me things that felt miraculous because they were small and human. A teenager who stopped slamming doors because someone finally listened to a feeling. A father who reconnected with his child after a week of undivided attention. A couple who stopped arguing as much because they felt seen. The change was not dramatic in the sense of fireworks. It was slow and stable and therefore more durable. These are not spiritual hacks. They are habits that reorient attention. Part of teaching also meant modeling humility. I confessed my failings in front of groups. I said, I used to take pride in being loving. I was wrong. I was often distracted and self-righteous. I am practicing presence as a penance and a joy. People responded with laughter and with tears. It made the practice less lofty and more attainable. The work is not about becoming a saint. It is about being human in a truer way. I also teach about the ethics of taking life. The other side made me see that all life is life. That is a hard teaching in a world that organizes life into hierarchies. I don't pretend to have all the answers about diet or consumption. I do say this: act with awareness. If you eat, give thanks. If you consume, do so with humility. The point is not perfection, it's presence. When you take, do so with gratitude and intention. The workshops became a kind of laboratory for the small practices I had learned. They were not always full of people wanting spiritual answers. They were parents, teachers, neighbors, ordinary people who wanted to feel less numb and more connected. Each small instruction was a seed. Over months, I watched communities change. Neighborhood watch groups started to include a weekly listen hour, where volunteers sat with people who needed to talk. It was not glamorous, but it mattered. One of the strangest and most humbling lessons of all has been realizing how little of the ripple I can predict. I can practice presence, and I can plant seeds, but I cannot command how those seeds will grow. That uncertainty is both terrifying and freeing. It means I am not in control. It also means that my obligation is not to outcomes, but to the quality of my giving. Sometimes the ripples are immediate. A person hears a word they needed, and it shifts their life. Sometimes the ripples are slow and hidden. Years later, someone will come up and say, "You once sat and listened to me, and it saved me, and I will have no memory of the exact day." The web works in mysterious ways. That unpredictability removed a lot of pressure from my shoulders. My job is to give, not to guarantee results. I also learned to accept that some people will remain dim in my review, no matter what I do. Not everyone wants to be held. Not everyone is open to repair. That is not on me. Love respects free will. My practice then becomes one of offering without clinging. Offer fully. Let go. That balance is the hardest art I have encountered. There are shocking moments when the ripples return unexpectedly. A family member I had once been distant with reached out 5 years later and said, "I felt you change. I felt less judged. Thank you." I had almost forgotten a particular conversation we'd had, but the other person remembered a small shift that changed everything for them. Those moments tell me that presence is a long-game currency. You invest it, and sometimes the harvest comes down the line. If you asked me for a map of how to live after what I saw, I would hand you a very small card with 3 words: attention, humility, repair. Attention, be present; humility, renounce the need to appear good, and instead, be good. Repair, when you hurt, apologize; when you are hurt, forgive, if you can. These are not original words. They are ancient, they are practical. I still have moments of doubt. I still slip. The mirror of truth is always with me in memory. Some mornings I wake and feel small and tired, and the world is loud and messy, and my attention frays. On those days I breathe and return to the rudimentary practice, 1 full minute of attention to someone I love. That 1 minute is a tendon that reconnects me to the web. I want to teach my children something practical. When you leave this life, you will be remembered by the cups you filled, not by the trophies or the lists of accomplishments, but by how full you made other people feel. That's the only immortality I now care about. To be a felt presence in someone's life is to leave something that lasts beyond memory. I am still learning to talk about these things in words that don't make them seem mystical. I try to speak plainly, pay attention, choose humility, and repair what you can. The other side showed me the truth, with a clarity that changed my bones. Doing that every day is my work now. It is quiet and steady and strangely joyful. I do not know how long I will live or when I will be shown the mirror again. I only know what it taught me. Life is a single force moving through everything. If I can treat each moment as an opportunity to pour light into another's cup, then when I stand before the mirror again, I hope to see brighter faces in front of me. That is the promise I made when I slid back into my body on that cold hospital floor, to come back and love properly. I keep that promise in the small things.